What I thought I would try and do today is to try and set the context a little bit for family nutrition. So to look at some of the issues about what are we actually eating, look at some of the data around that, but also look at the issues around marketing and how we're actually being influenced around the foods we eat. How do we know what we're eating? You know, what are we picking up from advertising and from labelling? And then finally to look at the policy issues that might drive us in the right direction or possibly the wrong direction, but we'll see from that. Okay, so I think the important thing to state is that our relationship with food is changing all the time, and we are much more informed and much more demanding of the kinds of food that we eat. Up until this point, food has actually been absorbing an ever-decreasing amount of family budgets. So it's been dropping from about 15% of disposable income down to about 11%, which is the average. Now, that's obviously quite different for different groups, and low-income groups are spending a significantly more higher amount of money on food. But that's changing, because commodity prices are changing at the moment. And some of those basic food stuffs you'll have noticed, bread, eggs, prices are rising quite dramatically. So that's having a very big impact on the way we choose food, and obviously the types of foods that people on lower incomes can actually afford to eat. So we're also have got a much more diverse and exotic choice of foods, and season defying. You know, we can get food at any time of the year, so we've got a much bigger range of foods to look at, and people are beginning to be more differentiating about where the food has come from, the quality of foods, etc. But just a little test. In your supermarket, how many products do you think there are in an average supermarket that we've got to choose our foods from? We got consensus? 40. Hey, well done. 40,000 products, which, if you're trying to stick to a budget when you go around a shop, is quite defying, because it's really difficult. So you're tempted all the time by all this wide range of things that are sold very much in your face. And you know, this front end of aisle marketing that you get, how much do you think that influences our choice? We're discriminate shoppers. We're not influenced by advertising, are we? 2 to 5 times an increase of products bought if they're on the island. So, you know, we think we're not being influenced by this, but there's a huge science in how supermarkets are laid out, the size of the aisles, whether you can go down them quickly, whether you saunter in them, what the smells are, what the height of the ceiling is. It's all about making us choose the foods the supermarkets want us to buy. So it makes it very difficult if you're trying to keep to a limited budget. Okay, so we've got an increasing recognition of the cost to our environment as well. So people are starting to talk about healthy, sustainable food now. So what is the impact of climate change on our food? What is the impact of the food we eat on climate change? And I'll come back to that. Oh no, I think actually we'll go here. These were some headlines from last week, 10 days ago, whatever. So we're beginning to start seeing how climate is actually affecting food prices. So we're expecting the yield of wheat to have fallen by 15% this summer in the UK. So that inevitably has a knock-on price effect on the price. So we're talking about a hidden hunger epidemic. And if anybody's been following work around food banks, you'll realise that food banks are increasingly important for a lot of people in our communities at the moment. Numbers of food banks are rising, supermarkets are getting involved, trying to get people to donate to food banks. So we have got this hidden epidemic that's there. Farmers are warning that UK prices will rise, and this follows on from drought in America and was it drought in America and Russia had a failure in there. Let me check that. But it was we're following on from UK poor yields, follow the USA poor yields and Russia poor yields, and retailers are now beginning to feel it. So, you know, Greggs, not perhaps the retailer I would be promoting, but Greggs are warning of slumps in their shares because people are cutting back on the amount of food they're buying out of home, and Greggs are having to pay more for their bread, etc. So it is already affecting us. We know that, and I talked about our food choice being dominated by the 4 large supermarkets, and it has been interesting about how that's beginning to shift a little bit now as people are being more discriminatory about where they shop. So people are choosing to shop in Aldi, Lidl and the cheaper supermarkets, so particularly for things like bread and cereals. Sorry, what's the last point on that one? Oh yes, this significant gap between what we say should be done and what we actually do. We all know the 5-a-day message, and I should think majority in this room probably get somewhere near it. Will you admit to that? Yeah, everybody tries. We try, we get there nearly. But actually, amount of fruit and veg is falling at the moment. And so particularly in low-income families, people are eating less fruit and veg because it's kind of an add-on to the foods that you have to buy. It doesn't provide very many calories to a family. So some of those things are chosen, you choose not to have the fruit and vegetables to go with it. So we are beginning to see a fall in fruit and veg that's bought. Now, that may be that people are not wasting it in the way that they had been doing. And we know that a lot of fruit and veg that was bought was wasted. Perhaps people are being more careful with their fruit and veg. We don't know, but certainly spending is falling. Okay, so from the Family Foods Survey, we know that we're spending less eating out. We're eating less milk and cream and carcass meats, and we're replacing those with processed meats and chicken and turkey. We're eating more eggs, cheese, soft drinks and alcoholic drinks. But in fact, that's actually resulting in small reductions in energy, saturated fats and sugars. So it's going in the right way, possibly. And then just to show this pressure on family budgets for low-income families remains high, and as I say, they're trading down for economies. But we know that low income is associated with low intakes of fruit and veg, low fibre intakes, and high added sugars. And that's not because people are ignorant. It's about people having to make choices about the way they're spending their money, and they are buying the calories, feeding their family and children first, and then these things get added on. So white bread still tends to be cheaper than wholemeal bread. Fruit and veg are an additional cost, and sugary drinks are cheap, and children demand them. So I thought we'd look at what young children are eating. And part of the problem with looking at this is that our data is quite old. We have the National Nutrition and Diet Survey, which gives us nutritional data. But the data for preschool children is taken in 1995, and obviously a lot has changed since then. So what we've now got is a rolling programme of the National Diet and Nutrition Survey, but that is very small numbers. So we're starting to build up a picture over the years, but with very small numbers. So we've got to take this data with a little bit of caution because it is small numbers, but I think it might be showing a trend. So here we go. We've got small but important changes. More bread. and cereals, but it's mostly white bread. And only about a third of preschool children are eating wholemeal bread. But they are eating whole grain cereals, so we have got a shift in types of breakfast cereals that people are eating. They're eating biscuits, cakes, buns and pastries. Most children eat those, about 85% of children eat those. But it looks as if they might be eating them less frequently and in smaller proportions. So going in the right direction. As you'd expect, as children get older, they're drinking the amount of full-fat milk they're drinking falls off, and it's replaced with semi-skimmed milk. And then they're drinking other milks, so semi-skimmed yogurts and fromage frais, replacing some of the whole-fat milk that they had been drinking. I think I mentioned earlier we're eating less carcass meat, but what we are eating is mainly chicken and turkey and coated poultry products. Now, for the nutritionists in the room, well, for most people in the room, you'll know that iron levels of white meat are lower than red meat, so that will have an impact on the amount of iron that children are eating. Red meat may have slightly decreased. Average amounts of fish eaten are increasing, but we're starting from a very, very small base. So children are still not eating large amounts of fish. Fruit and veg in this age group does seem to be increasing. So although it's dropping overall in this age group, it's increasing because, again, it was starting from a very low base. But that message about the importance of fruit and veg for young children seems to be having an impact. And the amount of confectionery is dropping. But you see this increase with age. So, again, as you'd expect. But I did some research probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago now. And I was with 6 months to 12-year-old children looking at dietary habits. And I was really shocked as a dietitian then. I think every child had had chocolate buttons and skips. Now, I think that's probably changed a bit. Skips were, do they still have skips? You can't gag on skips because they dissolve in your mouth. So they were the first weaning treat, along with chocolate buttons. They're quavers, are they now? So right, okay. So patterns are still there, but that was, I thought I understood children's eating patterns, but I was really shocked by that. And so I think it's. Please tell me it's improving. Is it improving, or we've still got chocolate buttons as first weaning food? Okay. Oh. Anyway, they're eating less of them, and the amount of soft drinks has disappeared. Is dropping a little bit, but it's still important amount of sugar from children's diets, and we're drinking as much soft drinks as we're drinking milk, which is also quite shocking. So what impact has that? Well, if you look at that, the bold line along the middle is the 100%. So in terms of vitamins as a percent of the reference nutrient intake for that age of children, most vitamins we're doing okay with on that kind of eating pattern, but look at vitamin D. Okay, now we wouldn't expect to get all of your vitamin D from diet, but the thing that really interests me is you look at the vitamin D plus supplements and it doesn't go up very much. So we're well down on dietary vitamin D. We try to add vitamin D through Healthy Start and general health messages, but it's having very little effect. So I'm sure Benjamin's going to talk more about that later. And then this is the same graph for minerals. And you can see there that iron is low, zinc needs watching. And that's part of the reason why in the School Food Trust Nutritional Standards, you've got standards for iron and zinc. And zinc was one of those minerals that perhaps people didn't think about until the nutritional standards came in, and it was recognised as quite an important nutrient that we weren't doing so well with. Okay, so this is looking at the data 1995, compared with the rolling NDNS. Things generally going in the right way, which is encouraging, particularly for sugar. This non-milk extrinsic sugar, are people familiar with that term? No, okay. Non-milk extrinsic sugar is the sugar that's in the diet that's not from milk, so excluding lactose sugar, but all other sugars in the diet that are extrinsic, outside of the cell wall, basically. So fruit juice has extrinsic sugar because the fruit juice has been extracted from the cells of the fruit. But basically, if you think of it as like added sugar, but there are a few other bits of sugar that go into there. So our intakes of sugar seem to be falling, but just be a little bit cautious that data, you know, it's not a very big database for the rolling NDNS. Fat seems to be going in the right direction as well. Saturated fat, we don't have a reference value for children, and obviously children would have a higher fat intake than adults. As they get older, you would expect the fat to drop to the adult level, but you could choose the right kind of fat. And so we do need to be thinking about reducing saturated fat in young children's diets. And then if you look at the total energy, but look at the range of energy at the bottom. That's probably quite important. That's a huge range of energy difference. So I just want to talk a little bit about childhood obesity, because people misunderstand what childhood obesity is. Baby fat, obviously, but children are born with a reserve of fat. That's normal, it's a sign of thriving, healthy infant, but it quickly disappears if you exclusively breastfeed. You get appropriate weaning patterns and you get weight-bearing activities. So if that is not happening, then infancy is a really critical stage to prevent childhood obesity. And it's one that perhaps we haven't thought of as being quite as important. Because by the time children get to school, 25% of them, quarter of children going to school are overweight or obese. And as they go through school, they get fatter. So that a third of them are leaving primary school are overweight. Sorry, that's primary school, not secondary school. And really important, only 5% of parents recognise that as being a problem. So we've got a mismatch between what's actually the position and what parents think is the position, which makes it very difficult for you as health professionals to raise a very difficult question about, do you address this? Because parents are not prepared for that. And the thing that's dropped off the bottom is really important. Childhood obesity is not benign. It's a really important health issue. And if children get to school age and they're overweight, we know it affects their attainment as well as their health. So we're talking about children being socially isolated, low self-esteem, bullied, etc. So as well as all the health issues to do with childhood obesity, we've got social issues as well, which are really important. So preschool, we should be reducing body fat to a minimum before it increases again in adulthood. So you get this big dip, as people will know from growth curves, in the amount of fat. If you get that early adiposity rebound, which is where children start to regain fat weight at around 3 rather than 5, 6, 7, it predicts obesity later in life. So really important marker of something going wrong in the early ages. And we need to create ways of life that continue to make obesity unlikely. So it's not about targeting those 25% of children. It's actually about trying to make it right for everybody so that none of those children become overweight. And I put this up. This is the Obesity Systems Map, which I'm not expecting you to see, but this came out of the Foresight report on obesity, which looked at the patterns for that we needed to address if we were going to address obesity. It's hugely complex. That's the only message I want you to take away from that. Not if you want to go and have a look at it, it's on the web, and you can have a look at all those complex interrelationships. But it's not just about health. It's about, you know, all the environment. It's about transport policy. It's about housing policy. It's about a whole range of things. So it's not simple. And we used to talk about simple obesity. It is the most complex area. When I qualified as a dietitian, it was always the junior's job to sort out obesity, because it was easy, it was simple, you just told them what they had to do. Nah, we know that. Right, marketing. For those of you who went to the Olympic Park, this is the largest McDonald's in the world. I think it's being bulldozed now, isn't it? I'm told it's not going to remain. It's interestingly how McDonald's have still got the golden arch, but you remember when McDonald's was red? McDonald's has sort of morphed into green and healthier, hasn't it? Interesting. So this was the biggest in the Olympic Park. Should it have been there? Well, I don't know if anybody of you have seen this report that came out of Sustain. It was looking at the marketing around the Olympics. And 3 major food companies sponsored the Olympics. McDonald's, Cadbury's, Coke. They got fairly large. I mean, I think if you went into the Olympic Park, what was people's opinion? Did you feel you were marketed those foods in the Olympic Park?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's schools everywhere.
Yep. Purple everywhere, wasn't there? Yeah.
Beautiful colour.
Mm.
I think one of the things that cheered me up a bit was there were big queues for, they had water dispensers.
Yeah.
There were massive queues for fill up your water bottle, and there weren't queues for some of the
Yeah.
restaurants.
Yeah. But, well, I think there's a whole debate about whether the Olympics should have been sponsored. But do you know how much money they put into the Olympics? Any idea what percent? Very small. Have a guess, how small? 3%. Sorry? 3%. 10%. Any advances on 10%? It was 2%. 2%. Pretty shrewd marketing, that, I think. So, we've got the Commonwealth Games coming up in Glasgow. I think we need to be looking at some of this stuff because, how can we be saying to parents a message about healthy eating if our biggest sporting event is covered by those sort of sponsors? Big debate, I think. And this was a statement from the WHO about marketing. I'll just leave you to read through that. I hope everybody in this room would agree with that. And the sad thing is that the UK is actually held up as the beacon for this in the EU, because we're the only ones that have got a restriction on TV advertising for children. So the UK is seen, as the place to follow. Fortunately, Norway are now looking at advertising to children. They've got a big consultation out about advertising and looking at the other influences of food, children's food. And hopefully they will come out with a much broader recommendations which cover longer time for TV advertising, because we restrict sugary fatty foods on children's advertising for things that are watched predominantly by children. So that doesn't include things like Coronation Street or the soaps that are watched by adults and children. And so there's a big sort of loophole there about there might be other areas we could tighten up on. And of course, other media, social media, Facebook, the internet generally. Huge amount of advertising to children on that, promoting unhealthy foods. So this is The call for action is the government's government statements. We know from Foresight, the Foresight reports, that obesity is a passive biological response to our changing physical environment. So it's the fact that our environment has changed such a lot and we haven't caught up in terms of adaptation, which is why we're all becoming overweight. It's the Chief Medical Officer described it as a fundamental failure of the free market, because if you look at childhood obesity rates, they increased dramatically from the 80s, when suddenly we had mass production, we had falling relative food prices, we had sophisticated marketing. When I had my children, and my children are now 20-something, you could go into the supermarket and you could have cornflakes, Weetabix and shredded wheat, and that was about it. There wasn't this wide range. So it wasn't difficult to go shopping with your children because they would have that. I see people agreeing with me. But you go now and you don't take children with you, do you? Because, you know, they will respond to the things that they've seen. And I think I meant to look it up, but the recognition of those golden arches of McDonalds is something every child aged about 2 can recognise that, which is a bit scary. Anyway, so we know it's our environment. We know that there's a huge free market out there trying to change things. And our government's response is this: people need to be more honest about what they eat. Not going to work, is it? We can't blame people. We can't blame the individual. We need to make sure that everything else supports it. And this was just something I picked up out of, this was the Daily Mail a little while ago. These were the headlines. You know, it's not helpful, is it? And in fact, if you read all of the little bits that went with that, it actually wasn't saying anything that was particularly wrong. It talked about baked potatoes being filled with cheese and having butter on them, and so they increased it was that made you fat. But most people flick through the paper, or they read the headlines, and they don't look at the small print. So they go away thinking, oh, they've changed their mind again about food. So just...
So they like they're on low-fat yogurt as well. There's this big thing, low-fat yogurt is more unhealthy for you. But it wasn't there if you read the small print again.
Yep.
They were saying it was what you were putting on the low-fat, you know, people were putting the nuts and the syrups, and so they were saying that was just as unhealthy as, you know, like an ice cream.
Yeah.
So again, that was a big headache.
Yeah. So we need to be, you know, we need to be able to have consistent messages. So just briefly, how do we know, what safeguards have we got in place? Well, we have got PARNUTS regulations, which is European for foods of particular nutritional value. I don't know where the word manufactured came in. I must have been thinking very much about marketing, and but that word shouldn't be there. So it's specifically to satisfy the particular nutritional requirements of specific groups. So it protects marketing and it protects the nutritional content of formula milks. Obviously, we've got breast milk we need to be encouraging for 6 months and to continue during weaning. But we do have very tight restrictions on advertising for breast milk substitutes and for children, for foods that are specifically marketed at children up to 3 years of age. But as we've seen earlier, that actually children eat things that aren't specifically marketed at children under 3. So we do have some safeguards in place, and we have the nutrition and health claims, which limit this sort of advertising. You know, you have to meet certain requirements to make a claim about it being low in salt or high in fibre or low in saturated fat, and the health claims around whether you can link a food to a disease prevention. Are on there, so you can make statements. There are a very small range of statements that you can make at the moment, and the EU is looking at thousands of claims. So if you see a health claim from next year onwards, it will have to be a genuine one. So what do we have in place? Well, we do have some things. We have early years nutritional standards, but they're voluntary. So for settings like nurseries, we've now got a range of nutritional standards. We've got Healthy Start, we've got the nursery milk scheme. We've got school food standards, which are mandatory for state schools, but academies are exempt, free schools are exempt. So beginning to erode on those nutritional standards, and I'm sure Joe can tell us more about that later. We've got the Ofcom restrictions on TV advertising that I mentioned earlier. We've got the responsibility deal, which is food industry working voluntarily to make changes around fat, salt, fruit and veg intakes. Debatable whether that's having any impact. We've got food labelling legislation, and if you saw the news recently, you probably realise we've won the battle about traffic light labelling. On front of packs now, all the major supermarkets have agreed to be consistent and to use a colour-coded front of pack labelling. So that's a big tick for the campaigners on that one. And we've got Change for Life and Start for Life. And the good news is that people do think it's important. Adults want to improve their own way of eating, and they certainly think it's important for children. And the majority of adults understand what constitutes a healthy diet, and eating fruit and veg is usually the thing that they'll come up with. And it certainly is for children. If you ask children about what's a healthy diet, then they will always mention fruit and veg. But there are some interesting facts, because limiting fat was considered significant for adults, but less significant for children, and the converse for sugar. So limiting sugar was seen as important for children, but not so important for adults, which is interesting. Similarly, taking vitamin supplements was considered not at all, or not very important for adults, and not that important for children. 67% of people said vitamin supplements aren't important for children. That's a bit worrying when we're trying to promote vitamins in terms of folic acid and vitamin D, obviously. Okay, so what else needs to be done? Oh, we need to shift our food culture. We need to get people understanding the influences of marketing, to understand where their food comes from, to understand how to cook it and the quality of food. But that'll take some time. But for people in this room, consistent messaging is really, really important. So we need to make sure that as health professionals, we are all saying the same thing, because that message is going to be delivered by lots of different people. And if a new mother is hearing a different message from the worker in the children's centre to their health visitor or their midwife, then they're going to reject it, and they're going to listen to marketing and other things where they're getting the information from. So age-appropriate, consistent messages are probably my key plea, that's something we really need to work on. And as we move into this importance of climate change and understanding sustainable food, we need to make sure that those two messages go together and that we're not talking about two different messages around climate change and nutrition. Should we have better controls on advertising? I'll leave you one to ponder on that. And should we have legislation rather than voluntary arrangements with the food industry? I'll leave you to think about that. Thank you.